Like so many things, I think the ideas for Digexin really started on a personal level. And when you go to the store and you go to the supplement aisle where we live, right, you have many different fiber supplements, a little bit of digestive enzymes. We're not really here about that today. And then a whole lot of probiotics and maybe on the very far end, detox kits. But why are there 10 feet of options? Clearly, this is a huge issue. It impacts 40% of Americans today, and you can expand that to the West. And so we said, well, is there a different way to come at this? Is there a different way to address this? And we're specifically looking at function. How can we help the body on a daily basis to do what the body wants to do, right? And so we came up with this idea of how can we soothe the gut?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the NatureCity Podcast. I'm your host, Carl Pradelli, and I'm also the CEO and co-founder of NatureCity, having started the company over 20 years ago with my wife, Beth. And since then, it's been our pleasure to have served over 500,000 Americans by offering them the best supplements we can make. I think you're going to be really happy you tuned in today, particularly if you're struggling with digestive issues or having trouble maintaining regular bowel movements or comfortable bowel movements. You may have also heard of this thing called the gut-brain axis, where what happens in the gut affects your brain and how you feel. The ingredient we're going to be talking about today can help you with all these issues. It's called Digexin. And to help us break it down, we are joined by not one, but two special guests who are experts on Digexin from NXT USA. We have Eric Anderson. We welcome Eric back to the podcast. Eric, how are you today?
Fantastic, Carl. I'm really glad to be back again. Thank you for inviting us, and hopefully we'll bring some really great information to the podcast today.
Absolutely. And we're joined for the first time by Elise Kaiser. Elise, how are you today? And thank you for being here.
I'm great, Carl. Thank you so much for having me today.
You may, regular viewers of the podcast may remember Eric. We talked about their great, revolutionary, in my view, joint health ingredient called Tamiflex. And both Eric and Elise together, if you're familiar, if you use any of our vitamin K2 supplements with vitamin K2, were very much instrumental in bringing MetaQ7, the premier form of vitamin K2, really to the U.S. marketplace and educating and telling us all the great things about vitamin K2 and that ingredient in particular. So thank you guys for that. That's, actually quite a service to the health of all of us. So, all right. So Digexin, let's talk about that. Lisa, I'm going to start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit what Digexin is and, what it's made from?
Sure. So Digexin is a synergistic herbal extract of okra and ashwagandha, and it's used for gut health and gut-brain axis. So this natural blend has demonstrated very positive outcomes for digestive function, regular evacuation, and healthy stress response.
Terrific. Eric, I'm going to throw this to you. It's always interesting to me how these ideas come up. How'd you get the idea for Digexin, where it came about? I know Elise mentioned okra, which frankly I had not seen in a supplement ingredient before. Can you tell us a little bit about, this innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. So like so many things, I think the ideas for Digexin really started on a personal level. I mean, we all have folks in our lives that struggle with certain health issues. And in my case, one of my best friends in the entire world really has issues with digestive health. And when you go to the store and you go to the supplement aisle where we live, right, mm-hmm. we choose to bring out dietary supplements as our career, as our endeavor, right? We could be out selling tobacco or pesticides or other things. We don't. We try to bring products to market that help folks. So we look at the offerings on the shelf, and you have many different fiber supplements, right? From mass market companies to, the more traditional dietary supplement companies. You have a little bit of digestive enzymes. We're not really here about that today. And then a whole lot of probiotics and maybe on the very far end, detox kits. But mm-hmm. why are there 10 feet of options? Clearly, this is a huge issue. It impacts 40% of Americans today, and you can expand that to the West. It's a huge issue. And so we said, all right, fibers, maybe that's not going to work for everyone because of gas and bloating and other nasty things, right? And probiotics, maybe they're not delivering the solution for a number of people. Certainly it wasn't for my friend. And so we said, well, is there a different way to come at this? Is there a different way to address this? And we're specifically looking at function. How can we help the body on a daily basis to do what the body wants to do, right? And so we came up with this idea of how can we soothe the gut? If the gut is irritated, we hear about things like leaky gut syndrome, and we all, you feel when your stomach is not feeling right? So a lot of that can be based on excessive inflammation, irritation in the gut. So how can we calm that down? And it turns out that okra has been known for quite a long time to help calm the tissues in the gut, to help soothe the epithelial tissues, to hold on to moisture and to support the mucosal tissues that line the gut. So it kind of calms everything down. And then how can we help promote digestion? So the idea is that everything should be moving. As we age, things slow down a little bit, and that's not a good thing. You want the food to move through the body, to be broken down, to be absorbed, and then to leave. So we said, how can we make that happen? And we looked at a number of different mechanisms, and one that popped out was the 5-HT pathway, which really is essentially impacted by serotonin. And if you can improve serotonin, which is this feel-good hormone that the body produces, if you can support that, it actually tells the body to speed up peristalsis, speed up the process of moving the food through the body. And so if we put these two things together, can that help folks? And in fact, it does.
Yeah, you mentioned peristalsis, which may be something some of our viewers may not be familiar with. That's just the involuntary muscle movements that your digestive tract uses to kind of move food through the system. Is that right?
Exactly. So it's the process of going through. And if you think of our intestines, I think of it like a boa constrictor, right? Squeezes and moves and squeezes and moves. Well, if those muscles slow down, in really terrible cases, almost stop squeezing, then everything goes slower. So let's tell the body, keep it moving, keep that food moving through. And things like hydration and helping soothe those tissues and keeping the moisture in the digestive tract. These are all important strategies to help keep the food moving.
So I know you guys have done, I think, completed 2 studies. One's published, one's soon to be published. Can you guys just summarize some of the key benefits of Digexin you've seen that you think are noteworthy?
I can address that. I mean, first and foremost, what we're really looking at is proving that the supplement works. And so if we look at the method of discovery, first we want to say, okay, let's screen different herbs, different compounds to look for certain activities. We've mentioned boosting serotonin, helping to inhibit things like cortisol, I'm sure we'll talk about. So we screened, really started with 900 herbs, and each herb has multiple actives, and we screened and narrowed that down to 2 key candidates, and then narrowed that down. And that was in cellular studies. Then we moved to looking at in vivo in a living thing. And so we actually got volunteers and had them try it. Are you experiencing something? Kind of an open label, very not scientific, but do you feel this? And then that moves into a pilot study or a proof of concept study, where you have a smaller group of folks that are enrolled into a structured clinical study that's administered by a practitioner. And we see that, yes, wow, in this group with 45 participants compared to placebo, we saw really great benefits. And what kind of benefits? We saw increased regularity. So these participants were enrolled because they had too few bowel movements per week. So they were averaging about 3 per week. By 7 days, it was becoming a daily event. So they very quickly moved from 3 bowel movements a week to 7 bowel movements a week. Well, the net result of improving that frequency is you see less bloating, you see a 60% reduction in abdominal discomfort, you see an 89% reduction in constipation symptoms. And so this was all very wonderful. The side effect, if you will, is that boosting serotonin actually helps improve your stress response, your mood response. Ashwagandha is an adaptogen, and so it helps to balance our mood. These folks reported that their perceived stress levels came down almost 50% from a ranking of a 26 to an 18. We saw a 65% improvement in quality of sleep. If we're not stressed, if we're not upset, sleeping's much easier. There was an improvement in wakefulness. Did I get a good night's sleep? When I wake up, am I ready to go? Right? And so that was improved. So we showed this in the first study, and then we've showed it also in the second study with a much larger population, 135 people that were struggling, that saw a significant improvement starting even at 7 days.
No, and I know in all your studies you always do, you make them placebo-controlled studies, double-blind placebo-controlled studies. So you guys do good research, and that's a pretty impressive list you have there. I mean, just helping alone with people staying regular, which is a challenge that really spans demographics, right? Male, female, younger, older folks, especially with increased levels of stress that people are feeling. Actually, that's a good question. How do you recall the age group of the folks in your studies?
The participants were 45 to 60 years of age on average. Yep. And so in a clinical study, you want to have a representative sample. So the more people that you can bring in, you get a better cross-section of folks, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to have lots of average people to see, is this going to work for everyone? Is it representative? Yeah. And then you say, all right, we're looking at a specific thing. If you're looking at pick a subject, we want to look at a product that helps improve comfort in knees, right? So you find people that have a little bit of knee discomfort. In this study, we enrolled people that had issues with occasional constipation. We knew that they had an issue, and so they were selected to be in the study. And then you randomize it. So half the people get an active, the Digexin, and half the people get a placebo. And then you can compare the two groups and say, yes, this is going to work for folks based upon that trial.
No, absolutely. It's the right way to do it. And I think it was both males and females. It was like about 1/3 male, 2/3 females. Is that about right?
Yes. Yeah. It was as evenly split as we can get. And then within both of the genders, they're randomly assigned to the active or the placebo. So we're trying to have a balance in that.
Okay, we'll get into some of these benefits a little more in a bit. But I know you mentioned a little bit on how Digexin works, and I think you kind of outlined 4 different mechanisms, which are all kind of happening at once in the body that Digexin is influencing. Can we go through those right now?
Sure, absolutely. So first and foremost, we're saying that Digexin helps the body help itself. It increases the speed of digestion. So it's supporting food transit through the body and resulting in complete and regular evacuation. The second thing it does is it's impacting the overall sense of mood and well-being. And by supporting this feel-good hormone called serotonin, which is benefiting and promoting the peristalsis, we have a general sense of well-being, restful sleep, positive mood. The okra specifically helps to soothe the fire in the belly, right? It soothes the gut lining, hydrates the stools, keeps everything soft and moving through the body. And then the final, the mechanism is an impact on cortisol. And cortisol it's your fight or flight hormone, right? When we're under a lot of stress, we have a lot of cortisol, and that makes us feel, uptight and anxious. And that was significantly reduced. And so pairing all of those together, we see what we would call the factor of four. This factor of four combined results in the benefits that the consumers desire.
Excellent. And I know you mentioned serotonin production as one of the effects of Digexin. You always think of serotonin of kind of affecting our brain health and how we feel, but I believe most of your serotonin in your body is actually produced in the gut. Is that right?
That's actually correct. So about 90% of the serotonin is created in your gut. You have more neurons in your gut than you do in your brain. So it's considered your second brain, but there's actually more there in your gut than in your brain. And the interesting thing, so the ashwagandha and okra are working a little differently. The okra is actually working on site in the gut. So it's working, the polysaccharides in the okra are actually influencing the microbiome, which then is triggering serotonin to be created in the epithelial cells in the gut, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So you have a mood factor from the okra. And then ashwagandha actually works more on your HPA axis. So that's your pituitary adrenal axis. And it helps to mediate stressors. So how your body reacts to the stress. It helps your body through that. That's its main way, by lowering cortisol.
Yeah.
But it also affects serotonin in the brain, receptors in the brain. So they're working at different ends to help with that stress and the mood.
And that's really interesting, Elise. And then there's I sort of mentioned it a little bit in my, at the start, but there's a lot of excitement, especially in the research world, I guess, about this whole concept of the gut-brain axis, right? But it seems, my point of view anyway, there's a lot of other supplement ingredients, trying to take advantage of this and, saying they help support the gut-brain axis. But, that claim seems to be ahead of their research. With Digexin, you actually start out in this direction in the ingredient development, right? So it wasn't like you kind of backed into this. This is actually how you started formulating Digexin and coming up with, the components. And now you actually have the science with your initial pilot study and now the larger, more comprehensive study. If you can maybe just, summarize this a little bit in terms of, you talked about it a little bit. Maybe we could just kind of summarize it all together because it's an important point of how Digexin works to support the gut-brain axis.
So the gut-brain axis is a two-way communication system that links the central nervous system with your GI tract. Mm-hmm. So it helps. It regulates physiological processes related to both gut and mental health. Mm-hmm. And as I was saying before, the synergistic blend of the two ingredients are working on both.
Right.
So it is helping with that two-way communication as the okra is working on site in the gut, helping to influence the microbiome, which is then creating serotonin. And the serotonin is your feel-good and your happy hormone. So you'll get more of that then up in your brain as well. Same with the ashwagandha. So the ashwagandha is also affecting that as well. So you're having the actual soothing of your digestive tract, you're having the reduction in bloating, you're having, better bowel movement. So all of these things together combined, you're getting both the physical and the psychological factors to it.
That's great. And what's interesting is, we think of the gut-brain axis as a one-way communication tract, but I think it actually flows both ways.
Two-way. Yeah, it goes both ways.
Right.
And that's why both affect each other so much. Like if you're having poor digestion, mm-hmm. you feel miserable. Or is it because you feel miserable you're having poor digestion? It's both. They both affect that.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of us have been there where, you're stressed and all of a sudden you feel your stomach is starting to bother you, right? And, those generally aren't two independent things. They're related. And then, it works the other way around too, right? I mean, something's bothering you in your gut and all of a sudden, you don't feel well, your mood's affected and stuff like that. And I think that's really the beauty of what you've done here with Digexin is you're helping gut function and certainly elimination and healthy evacuation, but you're also helping that food move through the system, which is to me like such an important dynamic, right? Because it affects not only affects things like the ability to stay regular, but just nutrient absorption and just the health of the whole system. So, I mean, I think that's really important. At the same time, at least in your research, you've seen that people actually have, much better reported levels of perceived stress and their ability to respond to everyday stressors.
Yeah, we had like a 28% reduction in people's overall perceived stress scores.
Yeah, which is significant. And certainly was significant over the placebo group, I'm sure.
Mhm.
And then there was the mood. People's moods also seem to improve over time just because of all the things we're talking about. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, and that's the one thing I think to stress here, at least from my perspective, is all these mechanisms you're talking about. They're digestion supporting all of them and helping all of them all at once, all day, every day with continuous use of the product, right? It's not just like, one thing randomly at a time. They're supporting you all the time, all day, each day.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the synergistic blend is how these two botanicals are working hand in hand to accomplish this.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about the research and what you guys found and some of the benefits. I know we kind of touched on a lot of them, but maybe we'll just circle back just because a couple of things that I also found interesting that we haven't touched yet. As you mentioned, you've completed two studies with Digexin. The first, I think, was a smaller pilot study with 48 participants, which, by the way, is a good sized pilot study. A lot of people's pilot studies have like 10 people, right?
A lot of people's real studies have 10 people. Yeah, that's what they go. Yes.
Yeah. And you were able to show really interesting results in just 14 days. And then most recently you did it was 135 subjects. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
135 subjects, and this lasted not 14 days, but 60 days. So, on some of the digestive benefits, one of the things we did not discuss yet is the effect on the intestinal, integrity intestinal barrier. I know you mentioned, Eric, a little bit before, the whole concept of leaky gut, which is essentially, your gut, the wall, I guess the intestinal walls, kind of are pretty protective about what they allow to get into the body, into the bloodstream. Obviously, you want the good stuff to get in and the not so good stuff to stay out. And certainly the ability to maintain good function as barrier is really important. And I think you had some results with Digexin here too. Is that correct?
Yes, and the nice thing about our study, and it would be really fun to go into maybe each of the categories, is how do you evaluate, is the product working? Are you getting a benefit? So anecdotal evidence, I gave it to my aunt and it worked for her. That's great, but it's not really scientific.
Right.
So in our studies, we look at a number of things. We look at physician assessment, and there's a whole slew of, what the physician asks you. Are you feeling better, less bloated? There's self-reporting, and people keep diaries. There are biomarkers. Like if you go to your practitioner, they might check for your blood pressure or your cholesterol. These are biomarkers. This is the body is telling us something. It goes up or it goes down. In the case of gut permeability or gut integrity, you want to soothe things and as I said, tame the fire a bit. And two ways you can measure that are through a couple of compounds called zonulin and DAO. And these are markers in the blood that the study results, the test scores will show if those markers go up or down. And if you can impact those in a positive way, that you're helping soothe the gut, you're helping keep the integrity of the intestines, you're helping keeping everything where it should be, you're helping to promote the absorption of the nutrients that you want. And by measuring the zonulin and measuring the DAO, it confirms what we see from also the physician assessment and from the patient reports.
Absolutely. And in your research, did you guys look at things like helping like with occasional indigestion or gas or bloating?
Yes, absolutely. So the two main physician assessment tools that were used was the it's called the PAC-SIM, the Patient Assessment of Constipation Symptoms, and the Patient Assessment of Quality of Life. So constipation symptoms are things like discomfort, pain, cramps, and bloating. Quality of, and that would include also, are you having issues with acid and discomfort, and how do you feel, right? And then the quality of life issues are more on mental, emotional, psychological effects. How are you feeling about the stresses that you're dealing with on a daily basis? And we saw, importantly, a statistically significant benefit, but maybe more so a clinically significant benefit. So what does that mean? Statistically significant means before and after, you can calculate the change, and it was significant. But clinically relevant is, are you helping the person? Is the person feeling better? Are they getting the results they want? And that's where you see the frequency from 3 bowel movements to 7 bowel movements, that you know that it's working. And I'm hoping that you ask about the blue poo test.
Oh, I know the blue muffin test. Yes, we're gonna ask. Let's talk about that whenever you're ready.
So I'm not making this up. There's actually a published paper, and the title of the paper is Blue Poo: Impact of Gut Transit Time on the Gut Microbiome. And so there's a challenge, right? How do we know that this is working for everyone, and how do we test that in a reproducible manner? And so some folks said, well, let's see how long it takes the food to get through your body. So we were able to use essentially a muffin with a special medical grade blue food coloring in it, blue dye, and you consume it and then measure how long does it take before the toilet turns blue. And so if you do that at baseline before you start using the supplement, and then you do it at the end of the study, what changed? Well, in this case, from baseline to the end of the study, the food, the blue dye, went through the body 4 hours faster on average.
Wow.
So the food is moving through your body 4 hours faster, and that's a good thing.
No, that's terrific. And I think it gets back to the peristalsis thing, which is just helping support the natural involuntary muscle movement of how food moves through the intestines and so on. And so that's actually pretty remarkable. I mean, that really is really good evidence. I mean, you probably could figure it out other ways that the food is moving better, but that blue dye muffin test is a pretty interesting one.
Some of the other biomarkers that and assessments that were done, looking at things like reflux with the acid coming up in the digestive system, looking at indigestion, discomfort, bloating, constipation, of course. What we were maybe not expecting to see in the study is an impact on diarrhea, loose stools. And that's the body's reaction to wanting to get rid of things, right? It's not a normal digestive process. And that was significantly reduced. So we know that calming down the system and helping to expedite the speed of digestion really helps balance on each end of the spectrum quite a bit.
So, Elise, is there anything else on the digestive side with respect to the Digexin research that we should discuss?
Yes, I'd like to elaborate a little further on the symptom of bloating. We had some pretty remarkable results with, like, on a scale of 0 to 4. On average, people were about a 3 for discomfort, which is pretty high. After taking Digexin for about 14 days, people on average were about a 1 or lower. So that's a pretty significant decrease in bloating.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. And circling, I had something that occurred to me with respect to bowel movements. I know Eric, I think, mentioned you can start to see significant results as little as 7 to 14 days. Are those results then sustained with continued use of the product, or do you kind of revert to where you were?
Exactly. So at the end of the day, we're trying to provide support on an ongoing basis. This is a supplement designed for daily consumption. And so we definitely want to have fast acting, right? But this is not a laxative. There are times where you're just going to need that extra, and laxatives are out there for that purpose. But what we're trying to say is on a daily basis, can we support the body's normal structure and function? And so in the studies we saw, even at by day 7, they were averaging now five bowel movements that week, and by day 14, it was moving into 7 to a daily bowel movements per week, and this sustained through the 60 days of the trial. So it's not like your body doesn't adjust to it; it doesn't plateau necessarily. But once you get to the regularity, right, there's nothing more to evacuate, if you will. One of the amusing tests that was used was called the spontaneous bowel movement. Now, it doesn't mean that you spontaneously have a bowel movement when you're not expecting it. We're not talking about roller coasters, right? But when it's time to go, is it complete? Is it a complete event? And we saw that absolutely occurred as well. So we're seeing more frequent bowel movements and more complete bowel movements, which then is giving you that good feeling. What's the difference between a good day and a not so good day? It's that morning bowel movement. And so it was really nice to see those results as well.
And I guess with the hydration effect of the stool, essentially, you can, I'm sure you probably had some reports of more comfortable bowel movements too. Is that right?
Absolutely. And you want to keep everything soft. And, within the constipation symptoms, there are 10 questions about constipation. There are three questions that are about rectal health. And one of the issues is, do you have pain? Do you have tearing? The exclusion criteria for our study was, do you need extra assistance, digital assistance to clear your bowels? And obviously very extreme, and I think most of us would like to avoid that. So keeping things soft and keeping things regular and complete, that's the goal.
So I know earlier we discussed some of the benefits of Digexin with respect to mood and helping the body cope with stress. Elise, is there anything you think we should reiterate there or that we missed?
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, you have the two ingredients working together. Serotonin's going up, cortisol's coming down. An interesting part with this is the improved overall quality of life. You reduce stress, but your quality of sleep. So the ease at which you do fall asleep, that's a big part for people. A lot of people just can't just actually get to sleep. Mm-hmm. The restfulness of your sleep, how well did you sleep throughout the night? How often did you wake up? And then how easily you wake up as well. So all of these parameters were improved when it came to sleep. And that's a big part of stress. If you don't sleep well, you are going to be absolutely stressed out, and that will compound. So the improvement for sleep overall improves quality of life.
Absolutely. And I would imagine, at least everything we've discussed today, both on the digestive side as well as the brain health side, contributes to that sleep quality improvement. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to be comfortable as a whole. So if your digestive tract is upset, if you are bloating, or if you're dealing with any one of those physical issues, you're not going to be comfortable. You're not going to sleep well. And then the same goes for all your different stressors. So if your cortisol level is high, you're staying awake. Like as your body naturally, when you wake up, your cortisol is supposed to go up. And then as the day goes later, it's supposed to start to come down. And it's supposed to be at a low point for you to go to sleep. But if it's staying up like this, you're not going to sleep. So the fact that this does help to reduce that cortisol level or bring it into a healthy level, it's supposed to be in a healthy balance, along with your feel-good hormone is also raised, you're going to have just a better quality of sleep.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up about the healthy levels of cortisol, because sometimes these things get demonized, but cortisol
It shouldn't be.
Yeah,
you need it.
Exactly. It actually has an important role in the body, but it's when it gets out of elevated where it can cause you some issues. So I think that's a really, really good point. Last question for you guys. Our customers, as well as us at Nature City, always concerned about safety or potential unwanted effects. Has the research with Digexin raised any concerns or cautions?
One of the nice things about these two compounds is that they have been used traditionally in Ayurvedic medicine, and they're commonly consumed even today. So okra, you may have heard of okra. It's a nice vegetable. You see this in maybe be familiar with a gumbo or a jambalaya from like New Orleans, or if you're south of the Mason-Dixon line and you're getting your alligator with your fried okra, right? It's in the diet. But what we are looking at is using the tender okra pods when they're still young and soft and full of nutrients. And then we're essentially using water, right? A water extraction of the vegetable. The FDA in the United States considers it to be a food. Okra, it's a vegetable. And then ashwagandha, of course, has a complete safety profile. We took that one step further. We combined the two together and then studied that for safety. So we looked at how does that affect your cells? How does it affect cell reproducibility? How does it affect on a short-term basis and on a long-term basis? And all of that data has been done. So we know that it is, each individual ingredient is safe, and the combination of the two work very well together without concerns about contraindications.
Yeah, I imagine, Eric and Elise, that you did not randomly throw a certain amount of okra and a certain amount of ashwagandha together. There was actually a fair amount in terms of finding the optimal combination. Is that accurate?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a balance of the two, a synergistic blend that makes this work.
So if I take my ashwagandha and eat some gumbo with okra, I probably may not get this effect. Is that what you're saying?
Probably not. Probably not. Definitely not going to work like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been great. Really appreciate it, Eric and Elise. Is there any last words you'd like the audience to know, or you'd like to share about Digexin?
So I believe I speak for all of us in saying, if we can help folks that are dealing with digestive issues, this impacts our lives, right? It affects the decisions we make, the activities in which we engage. Travel, for example. If we can help the folks that aren't getting relief from the offerings that are currently available, this is a new approach. It's an herbal, plant-based approach. And if we can deliver that benefit to someone that is suffering and is looking for relief, that's what makes this, a good reason to be in the business. So we really hope that we can impart those health benefits.
That's really well said, Eric. At the end of the day, we're all here to help people. And if you're interested in Digexin, it's part of NatureCity's new True DYB standing for Digest Your Best, our new powder, which combines Digexin and many other nutrients, 16 in total, that can help you with your digestion, which also affects all the things we talked about. Today, we talked a lot about your brain health and your mood and your ability to cope with stress. But great digestion and the ability to stay regular helps so many other aspects of your health, which is why we came up with True DYB. Elise and Eric, thank you again so much for the time. All of us in Nature City really enjoy working with you and have for many, many years. And we look forward to that, continuing that well into the future.
Perfect.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. So that's it for this week's episode. I'm Carl Pradelli. If you like our podcast, you can subscribe on YouTube. We're also available on your favorite streaming services. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. We will see you next week.